Welcome to In the News with Double O Des. I'm Des Bernardo, giving you my perspective on news from South Africa and the rest of the world.
I am back with a continuation of the court case against the tobacco ban, and I please want to ask you to subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon to receive notifications for updates like this. Thank you for subscribing. There's so many of you that have subscribed, that have sent me messages, contacting me via Messenger, via email, via WhatsApp, and all of you are giving messages of encouragement, and I want to thank you for that, because this is a lot of work. It's hard work, but it has to be done. I want to thank all of you that believe in a good future for our country, and that you want to be a part of the solution. And one video that I will cover soon will be the difference between drama, living a life of drama, and living a life of solutions. And you can look forward to that video, because I will be highlighting many things that's wrong in our society today. But to get back to the court case, very exciting. The judges are going to be deliberating from now, but giving you an update now on what transpired. The last time we spoke, the judge asked how far can a court go to interrogate scientific studies? And this is a very important question, because it's important to understand that a judge is not a scientist. So they have to now interrogate things that they are not specialists at, and they need to be able to interpret evidence. And this becomes a difficult thing for a court. So they need to look at laws at the end of the day and decide whether the laws and even the Constitution has been complied with. So the argument that by banning sales you are going to stop smoking is a non sequitur, says Subel Fofita. Now these are the people that want to stop this ban on smoking. Subel says illicit trade will always continue, as we have seen from history, and he's 100% correct. If people continue smoking, what does the ban achieve, he asks. Perfect question, and I mean, for a judge that should be a simple thing to understand. He then continues that there is no realistic prospect of either stopping smoking or cutting supply during the nationwide lockdown. And this we know from evidence that came from UCT that said that 90% of smokers still manage to get hold of illicit cigarettes on the black market. Times are stressful enough under lockdown, he says, saying many millions have to contend with a ban. 8 million people. He adds that 600,000 people signed a petition arguing against banning cigarettes, saying they were ignored by the state while emphasis was placed on a few hundred submissions that supported the ban. Now that was absolutely shocking when the state actually said, and Cyril Ramaphosa, our president, said that people opposed the unbanning of cigarettes. So this is interesting that our government would listen to a few, but when there's a petition for 600,000 that they won't listen to that. Selective listening. Subel says the ban is a sledgehammer to beat people into submission, an act of cruelty. I like the fact that he's using words like this. We need words like this used more often in our courts. He adds that none of the reason put forward by the minister pass rational muster. That's another thing that's extremely important. Rationality, something our government has got zero of at this stage. Adds that stopping smoking seems to have become an obsession. Beautiful. I absolutely love what he is saying. And Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is obviously hell-bent, and she's adamant and obsessed about stopping smoking. Now, even although I'm not a smoker, I don't like it if I breathe in smoke at all. But I'm not going to be obsessed about stopping someone else's right to smoke. That obsession, once you start making that an obsession and you want to take that into law, you don't understand a democracy. And then, as I've said before, we have proof that she does not understand democracy. Neither do most of the people within the African National Congress, and even many of the other parties, those that stood beside Cyril Ramaphosa when they took our democracy away with the draconian measures during the lockdown. A judge now poses a question to Subel that the state set out in its heads of argument. Dlamini Zuma said that given South Africa has between 8 and 11 million smokers, if 1% of them were to need to be admitted into ICU, this would overwhelm the South African's health care system. Now, this is very important. This is actually a very relevant thing for the judge to ask. Subel Forfita replies that the argument is unreliable. You won't have a 1% all in the ICU at the same time, he says. He adds that of that 1%, many others would have comorbidities, implying they would anyway be admitted to hospital. And we know, based on evidence that I presented on Western Cape data, that this is the case. That most of the people actually have 3 comorbidities or more. The ones that end up dying that are also tested positive for the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The case now moves on to why the president has not deposed an affidavit. Isn't this interesting? He doesn't want to show which side he prefers in this argument because he's hiding behind Dlamini Zuma. He supports this fully, as I've proven in another video. Subel says it needs to be explained why the president previously announced that the ban on cigarettes would be lifted. This was later overturned. Subel says it cries out for an explanation. He is the person that should be justifying why he said what, and I fully agree. The court is now taking a break. Okay? Proceedings then resumed in the High Court with Advocate Arnold Subel SC continuing Fita's case challenging the tobacco ban. Subel now moves to the announcement by President Cyril Ramaphosa in late April that the cigarette sales ban would be lifted. And this is important because they highlighted earlier in the case that initially cigarettes weren't banned with the initial regulations, that it came in later. So there was an obvious push from somewhere to actually include a cigarette ban. And there must be some sinister reasons because initially they didn't have those reasons. Ramaphosa, in a televised address on April 23rd, initially approved the sale of tobacco products under level 4. 6 days after Ramaphosa made his announcement, Dlamini Zuma announced that the sale of tobacco products would not be allowed. Now, Cyril should have announced this, and he said that he made a mistake of not announcing it himself. But he is taking to his true self where he hides behind other people. He said at the time there was nothing sinister behind the renewed ban. Subel contends that Dlamini Zuma did not make it sufficiently clear that people should submit their views if they agreed with the ban being lifted. Anybody who would have been in favor of the ban being lifted would not have thought it necessary to put in representation, says Subel. Subel Forfita says it is undesirable to criminalize selling cigarettes through delegated authority, and is 100% right. This is not a time to come with political policy. One thing you take into account, those who are addicted and suffer medical conditions, should they now be convicted and sentenced up to 6 months and or a fine for participating in the sale of this product. He again adds the reason for the ban is weak. Well, it's actually almost non-existent based on proof and scientific evidence. Subel says the way that the cigarette ban was handled was secretive. Says such bans need buy-in and support, and he's 100% right. If you want to impose anything that takes away the freedom of the public, if you don't have the buy-in of the public, you cannot impose anything like that on them, because you are now forcing people to do something. There is something that allows that. It's called a state of emergency. We are not in a state of emergency. Why aren't we in a state of emergency? Because Mogoeng, the Chief Justice in the Constitutional Court, will not and would not allow it. And an entire bench of the Constitutional Court would have to approve a state of emergency. A state of disaster, Cyril Ramaphosa and his cronies, they could make that decision themselves and then abuse the powers given under a state of disaster, which is clearly meant for a flood, fire, earthquake, that type of thing, and impose it during a pandemic, which, as the court cases before have made clear, that it's a complete violation of our rights. Subel says the way that the cigarette ban was handled was secretive, and we know that it was secretive. Dictating to them what they will or won't do, he says, is counterproductive, that you shouldn't be dictating to people. It's fine to dictate to someone if you still give them the freedom to choose, but these people are dictating and taking your right to choose away. He again adds that the illicit and unregulated cigarette industry is blossoming, so they're actually achieving nothing with regards to the regulations. Subel has wrapped up his evidence for Forfita. The state will now present its arguments, and this is where it gets really interesting. The lawyer for the state, advocate Marume Maruna, SC, opens his argument by saying that responses to COVID-19 need to be proactive and swift. This is a government script that he was given. This is pathetic. I'm so sick and tired of government scripts. It probably comes straight from the World Health Organization. We don't have the luxury of having inquiries that will take time and consume resources of the state. Wow. Dictatorship alert. Actions have to be taken on the basis of what is known, he says. The state needs to be guided by what science tells us is probable. That's not good enough. Science can't tell you something is probable and then you make a case based on that. That's madness. He has no case. Moerane says the minister's task was complex. She needed to strike a balance to protect the public from the effects of the pandemic. As background, he notes that the FITA challenge is not a constitutional challenge. Okay? While he's trying to make it non-constitutional, it'll become one pretty soon. Moerane submits that FITA's argument that the minister can only ban the sale of alcohol under the Disaster Management Act is incorrect. He says it would have been impossible for the legislature to predict every item that may have to be banned under given situations and therefore provided the minister with leeway to prohibit the sales of other classes of goods. This is where the argument is going to fall flat completely, because the prosecution can very easily say here that there are so many other things that she could have chosen, and her choices can then be under attack. Why did she choose to attack cigarettes specifically? Moerane for the state says regulations promulgated by the minister under the Disaster Management Act do not have to meet the test of absolute necessity. Wow, we need to change this act. Like I said, we need to change this governance system and the constitution if we have to. Rather, the test should be whether the regulations are reasonably required. What is reasonable? What you dream up in your mind? I mean, this is madness. You can't come to a court with rubbish like this. This relates to questions around the applicable test for passing the regulations. Moerane notes that the National Executive has been given broad discretion to deal with natural disasters. This is not a natural disaster as intended for in the Disaster Management Act at all, and this is clear. We submit that the powers are broad, said Moerane, in situations where decisions need to be taken quickly. He notes that the minister has been tasked to make sure the pandemic does not overwhelm the state's health system. The state has a duty to take steps to prevent the spread of the disease, he adds. When most of the people are dying, according to the statistics, from hypertension and diabetes and being obese, how on earth can they justify that cigarettes be attacked now? He reiterates that in the state's view, the bar the minister has to meet in making regulations is not absolute certainty, that unless the measure in question is imposed, the health system will collapse. So the state's argument is basically saying that the minister should have powers to just make decisions and we should just take it. That's what this boils down to. And if this should pass in court, we have a real battle on our hands. He says that if the minister were to wait for such definitive proof, she would be in breach of her obligations. They are arguing now that if she actually has to come up with proper evidence, that she would breach her obligations. That she should just make decisions. Based on what? With what knowledge that's in her head? To read the provisions in this manner would render them unconstitutional, says Moerane. This guy is an absolute buffoon. Absolutely. This is ridiculous. Very, very saddening that the state is making this case. This tells you that we have a dictatorship, that democracy means absolutely nothing, that if this should hold water, our constitution means nothing. Nothing. If you can just give crazy powers to people under a state of disaster, they'll keep us in a state of disaster indefinitely, if they are going to get away with this. Moerane now moves to the question about substantive rationality behind the argument to ban cigarette products, noting that many of its arguments have already been included in the heads of argument that the state has submitted. As a result, the sum total of the state and FITA's cases will not be explicitly set out in court today. So what is happening here is he's not tackling the scientific evidence because they have none. He's trying to do this from a constitutional basis, I'm actually very surprised that this is the state's case. Because this is the strongest attack that they can make, is to say that the Constitution allows the minister these rights to protect life. And if they succeed with this, and this is their strongest case to succeed, then we're in serious trouble, people. I did not expect this angle, and it is dirty play, because now it's not scientific anymore. And what this can do is prove to us that the state of our system is even worse than we thought, that the system change needs to happen rapidly, that there should be a national outcry to change this constitution that everyone has lauded as the best in the world. According to the opinions of those more qualified than FITA or lawyers, the evidence is clear that smokers are at heightened risk of developing a more severe form of COVID-19, says Morani. No evidence, just makes a statement. He says, while FITA says the evidence here is inconclusive, this is not correct. Rather, what he said is that the emerging medical literature indicates that smokers are more likely to develop a more severe form of COVID-19, he says. They say emerging medical literature. Very clever use of words. Very clever use of words. And what they're saying is if there's a possibility that this could be a problem, then the minister has a right to make that decision, and that it's her constitutional right and objective to do that. That it would be a derelict of duty, in fact, if she does not do this. This is a very, very strong and good argument to use if you take scientific evidence out of the way. And it's definitely their best argument. It's really a low blow for democracy and for the people of the country for our government to do this. And I need all of you to see this in the serious light that I see it. Morani is asked by a judge why only the sale of cigarettes was prohibited and not smoking. She notes that some smokers may have stocked up on cigarettes while others may buy them on the illicit market. In response, Morani says the purpose of the ban was to decrease availability of cigarettes. You see, people, this has got absolutely nothing to do with the pandemic. While the ban cannot totally restrict the availability of cigarettes, it has reduced access to cigarettes. Well, it was proven that this is not true, that 90% of people were still buying cigarettes on the black market. And as such, has reduced smoking, he says. He says studies have confirmed this. What studies? No evidence, once again. Morani reiterates the state does not expect a total reduction in sales, but a significant reduction. Asked by the judge about the illicit cigarette trade, he replies that studies support the view that the ban has reduced smoking rates, and therefore the ban is rational. The court has now adjourned. The court is back in session with Maruma and Morani for the state continuing to set out the state's case behind the ban. Now, this case continues, and I actually want to get to the end where the judges actually adjourns, and Morani tells the court that the benefits of smoking are immediate. I think the benefits of not smoking are immediate. That's probably what they mean. Relying again on the reports produced by the HSRC and UCT, Murama says the ban on smoking has been successful in both reducing access to cigarettes and in getting smokers to quit. Now, what they're trying to say is that 10%, according to the UCT study, did not have access to cigarettes. Do they call this a success? How does that meet the ends of what the NDZ is trying to achieve in stopping people from smoking because of all the reasons she's given with people handing cigarettes to each other and all the rest, in spreading the virus? Morani for the state argues there is no requirement for the minister, that the minister has to consult with the public before making regulations. But even if there were such a requirement, she did in fact call for submissions for the public, from the public. The writing here is terrible, please bear with me. He adds that FITA did make submissions concerning the sale of cigarettes, and that the tobacco group appears to be arguing that its submissions appear not to have been given sufficient weight. Morani now addresses the fact that President Cyril Ramaphosa in April announced that the cigarette ban would come to an end during level 4, only for Minister Dlamini Zuma to 6 days later announce the ban would remain in place. He says after the president made his initial announcement, the matter was again looked at by the NCCC, the Coronavirus Command Council, in light of submissions received and medical evidence. They said before that this is because of like 2,000 signatures that they decided to change their mind. This is just a crux. There's no ways that actually affected the decision. A different position was ultimately adopted, he says. Morani says attempts to paint Minister Dlamini Zuma as having overturned the president's decisions are not rooted in fact. There I agree with him fully. President Cyril Ramaphosa is 100% behind this. He just likes to hide behind other people. Morani appears to be nearing the end of his arguments. He says that if the court for any reason finds against the minister, it should first later remedy the regulation banning smoking rather than suspending it outright. As such, a public health gains over the past few months would not be undone, he adds. Public health gains. He doesn't say that it had anything to do with the spread of the virus. The virus is not even in the picture here. Not even being discussed at all. This court case has nothing to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. This is clear. Look at the state's argument. It's a constitutional argument. Disgusting that they would use this crooked constitution with their Trojan horses built in, where the life of someone and the protection of someone is above our rights in the Bill of Rights. So they will say here that you can't smoke because we don't like the fact that you smoke because it's going to kill you. Morani has wrapped up his arguments and is now up to Advocate Arnold Sobel, SC, for FITA to reply. He says FITA disagrees with the regulation to be referred back to the minister for reconsideration if the court finds against her, and I agree. It should just be knocked off completely. Stubel argues it is not sufficient for the state to argue that the tobacco sale ban will be somewhat effective, even while acknowledging that some people will continue smoking. That can't withstand analysis on any basis, he says. And that is clear. There is no analysis for any of this. Sobel for FITA argues that evidence does not bear out the state's claim that a reasonable amount of people have stopped smoking as a result of the ban. Well, you can maybe comment underneath this video how many of you have stopped smoking because of the ban. And then we can see, what the state is claiming. I mean, they're grabbing this out of thin air, these arguments. And no judge is going to regard that as evidence. He puts it to the court that while some people may have initially quit, this would not be sustained. In addition, an initial decrease in cigarette sales when the ban was first announced may be attributed to the fact that people stocked up on cigarettes before the ban went into effect. Well, I saw that with my own eyes. I saw people walking into the garage shop and walk out literally with a basket full of cigarettes. Quoting from a medical expert that supports FITA's view, Sobel notes that China has 300 million smokers, but its ICU admissions have not been swamped by severe COVID-19 cases of smokers. That is very important to make that point right at the end. Sobel contends that more peer-reviewed studies would have to be done. I like the fact that he's bringing science back into it because the state stayed away from science because I said they had absolutely no case. Support the view that smokers are more likely to contract severe diseases of COVID-19 as the current evidence is inconclusive. And that's very important. The state, meanwhile, is basing its arguments in part on statements made by the World Health Organization. In a statement on May 11, the World Health Organization says a review of studies by public health experts convened by WHO on 29th of April 2020 found that smokers are more likely to develop severe disease with COVID-19 compared to non-smokers. With that, Sobel ends his arguments. The three judges, Mlambo, Basson and Molefe, will now retire to consider their decision. The judgment will be emailed to the parties. I want you to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon for notifications. I will keep you updated with regards to the judgment. When the judgment is made, I will discuss it with my perspective on the history as well as the future of the country. This is about liberty. This is about the freedom to choose, the right of choice. And our government has taken many rights away. Besides just smoking, kids locked up in their homes for months. Many people not being able to walk on the beach, in nature reserves. We can't infect the plants and the animals. This virus only affects humans. So why can't we be healthy? And a lot of people will say, but people will all just flock together like crazy. They will do that, yes, when you give them a curfew from 6 to 9, which is absolute madness because now everyone has to go out at the same time. This government cannot think things through because they're not competent to govern. That is the end of the story. I will follow up this when the judgment comes out, and I look forward to discussing this with you.